Lieutenant Carvest pressed his three-fingered hand against the observation window of the Galactic Defense Station, watching the distant stars with the kind of boredom that comes from 8 years of guard duty without a single incident. The most exciting thing that had happened this month was when Ensign Plork accidentally spilled fermented Glicks all over the commander's desk. Another thrilling day in paradise, he muttered, his mandibles clicking in what passed for a sigh among his species. The comm system crackled too. Life in Carveth's supervisor, hulking Brontax named Grell, appeared on the screen. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, which usually meant something had gone wrong again. Carveth, we have a situation. Let me guess. Someone ordered the wrong fuel shipment. Plark broke. Another console. Worse, much worse. Human just got deployed to Sector 12. Carveth felt his respiratory sacs deflate. Sector 12, the sector currently hosting the most brutal ground war the galaxy had seen in 3 decades. The Krallon horde had been tearing through defensive lines like wet tissue paper, and command had been throwing everything they had at the problem. Everything except humans, because, well, humans were administrators, clerks, button pushers who filed reports and managed logistics from the safety of orbital stations. Please tell me this is a joke, Carveth said. I wish. Lieutenant Mira Vance, 24. Standard years old, previous assignment. Records management on Station 47. Records management. Carveth repeated the words slowly, as if saying them again might make them make sense. How does someone go from filing reports to a combat zone? Gree's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement or horror, possibly both. Apparently there was a mix-up in the deployment system. She was supposed to be transferred to the Archives Division. Instead, someone with the cognitive capacity of a Glorbex mushroom hit the wrong button and she got flagged for immediate combat deployment. And nobody caught this. The order came through during 3rd shift. You know how it is. Half the staff was probably asleep at their stations by the time anyone noticed. She was already on a transport headed for the surface. Carveth closed all 4 of his eyes and tried to imagine what the Galactic Council was going to say when they found out a human, a species known primarily for their ability to create spreadsheets and organize supply chains, had been dropped into the middle of an active war zone. It was going to be a diplomatic nightmare wrapped in a bureaucratic disaster with a side of complete embarrassment. So what are we doing about it? Command is working on extraction protocols now. But it's complicated. The Krallon just launched a major offensive. Every available transport is either engaged in combat operations or evacuating wounded. Earliest we can pull her out is 72 hours. 72 hours. Carveth's voice rose an octave. The average life expectancy down there is measured in minutes. I am aware, Grell said dryly, which is why I am informing you that you have been assigned to monitor her suit telemetry. If, and this is a very optimistic if, she somehow manages to survive, we need documentation of everything that happens. Command wants a full report. You want me to watch a human die in real time and take notes. I want you to do your job, Lieutenant. The screen went dark and Carveth slumped in his chair. This was exactly the kind of disaster that derailed careers. Someone was going to take the fall for this monumental screw-up, and he had a sinking feeling it would not be the idiot who hit the wrong button. He pulled up Lieutenant Mira Vance's file, curious to see what kind of human had just been handed what amounted to a death sentence. The image that appeared on his screen showed a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, brown eyes staring at the camera with the kind of neutral expression that came from years of dealing with military photographers. Her service record was exactly as boring as expected: exemplary performance in administrative duties, combination for reorganizing the station's supply database, advanced certification in quantum filing systems, nothing, absolutely nothing that suggested she had any business being anywhere near a battlefield. Carveth activated the telemetry feed and immediately regretted it. The first thing he heard was screaming. Not Mira's screaming, thank the cosmos, but the screams of dozens of soldiers calling for support, reporting positions, and generally trying not to die. The audio feed was chaos incarnate, a symphony of weapons fire, explosions, and panicked voices in at least 6 different languages. Mira's video feed showed a first-person view from her helmet cam. She was crouched behind a chunk of broken concrete that had probably been part of a building before the Krallon turned it into rubble. Plasma bolts zipped overhead close enough that Carveth could see the distortion in the air as they passed. Okay, Mira's voice came through the feed, surprisingly steady considering the circumstances. Okay, this is fine. This is totally fine. I just need to figure out what the absolute hell is happening. A Krallon warrior, all 8 FT of Katani's armor and rage, charged around the corner. Mira raised her weapon, a standard issue plasma rifle, and Carveth waited for the inevitable. Humans were not fighters. They were soft, fragile things that belonged behind desks, not on battlefields, facing down creatures that had evolved for war. She pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. Oh, you have got to be kidding me, Mira shouted, looking down at the rifle. Safety. Right, because of course there is a safety. The Krallon was 3M away and closing fast. Mira flipped the safety off and fired. Snorts. The plasma bolt caught the warrior center mass and it went down hard. Armor smoking. She stared at the corpse for exactly 2 seconds before another voice crackled through her comm. Unknown unit. This is Sergeant Vex of the 9th Legion. Identify yourself, Lieutenant Mira Vance, formerly of Records Management. She said it like a question, which Carveth supposed it was. She sounded as confused about her presence as everyone else. There was a long pause. On the other end of the comm, did you just say Records Management? Look, there has clearly been some kind of mistake. I am supposed to be going to the Archives Division. I do not know why I am here, but I would really like to not be here anymore. Welcome to the club, Lieutenant. We would all like to not be here. Now get your head down and move to Rally Point Gamma. That is 30M northeast of your current position. Can you manage that? Mira glanced around, spotted a building with slightly fewer holes in it than the others and nodded. I think so. Then move and try not to die. Command gets cranky when they have to file death reports. Carveth watched as Mira took a deep breath, checked her weapon again, and sprinted from cover. Plasma fire tracked her movement, scorching the ground centimeters from her feet. She dove through a doorway, rolled, and came up with her rifle ready. She had made it somehow against all reasonable odds. She had made it. This is insane, Carveth muttered to himself. She should be dead 3 times over. The rally point turned out to be the remains of what had probably been a parking structure. A dozen soldiers from various species were hunkered down behind makeshift barricades, returning fire at cron positions across the street. Sergeant Vex, a Talvarian with scales the color of burnished copper, spotted Mira and waved her over. So, you are the human they dropped into this mess, Vex said, looking her up and down. Got to admit, when command said they were sending reinforcements, I expected someone with actual combat training. You and me both, Sergeant, Mira replied, sliding into position next to him. Any chance there is a transport coming to pull me out? Not for 3 days, assuming any of us are still alive by then. Vex handed her a spare energy pack. You know how to reload that thing. Mira looked at the energy pack, then at her rifle, then back at the pack. I am going to go with no, but I'm a really fast learner. Vex showed her the mechanism, his movements quick and efficient. Press here, twist, lock into place. You have got 12 shots per pack, make them count. An explosion rocked the building, showering them with dust and debris. Mira coughed, wiped her eyes, and peered over the barricade. The Krallon were advancing, moving from cover to cover with the kind of tactical precision that spoke to centuries of warfare. Okay, she said, more to herself than anyone else. They want to advance. We want them to not advance. I can work with that. She sighted down her rifle and fired 3 quick shots. The bar first one missed entirely. The second clipped a Krallon's shoulder. The third hit another warrior in the leg, sending it stumbling. Not bad for a clerk, Vex said, sounding almost impressed. Keep that up and you might actually survive your first day. That is the most encouraging thing anyone has said to me since I got here. The battle raged for hours. Carveth watched, unable to look away despite the mounting horror of what he was witnessing. Mira fought with a kind of desperate competence that came from knowing the alternative to success was death. She learned fast, faster than should have been possible. She started anticipating Krallon movements, calling out flanking attempts before they happened, and coordinating fire with the other soldiers like she had been doing it for years instead of hours. When night fell, the Krallon pulled back. They always did. Something about their biology made them less effective in darkness, though nobody had ever gotten close enough to study them and live to publish the findings. Mira collapsed against a wall, her armor scorched and dented in a dozen places. Her hands were shaking, and Carveth could see tear tracks on her dust-covered face through the helmet. Cam, I filed reports, she said to nobody in particular. Yesterday my biggest concern was whether we had enough purple folders for the quarterly inventory. Now I have killed what? 9-10 I have lost count. Sergeant Vex sat down next to her, offering a ration pack. First day is always the hardest. It gets easier. Does it really? No, Vex admitted, but people like hearing it. Mira laughed, a sound that was equal parts humor and hysteria. Great. Fantastic. This is exactly how I pictured my career going. For what it is worth, you did good today, real good. Most first-timers freeze up or run. You did neither. I did not have much choice. It was fight or die. That is when you find out what you are really made of. Vex stood, stretching his massive frame. Get some rest, Lieutenant. Tomorrow is going to Be worse? How can it possibly be worse? Trust me, it can always be worse. Vex walked away, leaving Mira alone. With her thoughts, she pulled off her helmet, ran a hand through her sweat-soaked hair, and stared up at the night sky visible through the broken roof. Mom always said I should have joined the family accounting firm, she muttered. Should have listened. Carveth made notes in his report, documenting everything he had seen. Against all odds, against every reasonable expectation, Lieutenant Mira Vance had survived her first day of combat. The question was whether she could survive 2 more. He had his doubts. The galaxy had been very clear about what humans were good for, and fighting was not on the list. Morning came too quickly. Mira woke to the sound of artillery in the distance, a deep rumbling that made her teeth ache. Her body felt like it had been run over by a cargo transport twice. Every muscle screamed in protest as she forced herself upright. Coffee, she croaked. I would commit war crimes for coffee. Best I can do is nutritional paste. Voice said. She looked up to find a Dendery soldier, his bark-like skin cracked with age, offering her a tube of something that looked aggressively unappetizing. What flavor? Gray, my favorite. She squeezed the paste into her mouth and immediately regretted it. It tasted like sadness mixed with industrial lubricant. Oh, that is foul. Builds character, the Dendir said cheerfully. Name is Coral. Heard you are the human they dropped here by mistake. News travels fast, not much else to talk about when you're waiting to die. Coral settled down next to her, his joints creaking. Been doing this for 20 years. Never seen anyone adapt as fast as you did yesterday. I am highly motivated by not wanting to be dead. Best motivation there is. He gestured to the ruined cityscape beyond their position. Kralin will hit us again. Today probably hard. They do not like it when we hold positions they want, and we are holding this position because strategic value. This district controls access to the main supply routes. We lose this, we lose the whole sector. Mira absorbed this information, her mind already working through the implications. Supply routes meant logistics, logistics meant choke points, resource allocation, transit times. She had spent years optimizing those very things, just in a considerably less explosive context. How many supply convoys come through here? Coral blinked, surprised by the question. 3, maybe 4 a day. Why and how many does the enemy know about? Probably all of them. They have scouts everywhere. An idea began forming in Mira's mind. A terrible, dangerous, probably stupid idea, but it was an idea, and right now ideas were in short supply. What if we could make them think there were more? Coral's wooden features creased in confusion. How we fake it? Create dummy convoys. Make them split their forces trying to hit multiple targets. She stood up, ignoring her protesting muscles. I need to talk to Sergeant Vex. She found the sergeant coordinating defensive positions on the east barricade. He listened to her plan with growing interest, his scaled head tilting as she explained the details. That could actually work, he said slowly. If we time it right, we could draw off at least a third of their assault force. I spent 2 years coordinating supply chains. I know how to make logistics look convincing. The problem is execution. We would need people to drive the decoys. That means exposing them to enemy fire. I will do it. Vex stared at her. You have been here for 1 day. which is 1 day longer than I should have been. Might as well make it count. She tried to sound confident, but her hands were shaking again. She shoved them in her pockets before anyone could notice. Carveth, watching from his distant station, felt his respiratory sacs constrict. She was volunteering for what amounted to a suicide mission. This human, who by all rights should have been cowering in a bunker, begging for evacuation, was instead proposing to drive straight into enemy territory as bait. She has lost her mind, he said to the empty room. The stress has broken her, but Sergeant Vex was nodding, already working through the tactical details. Within an hour they had assembled 3 vehicles, loaded them with empty containers to simulate cargo, and mapped out routes that would maximize visibility to Crayon scouts. Mira climbed into the lead vehicle, checking the controls with hands that refused to stop trembling. This was insane. This was beyond insane. This was the kind of stupid that got mentioned in obituaries. All units, this is Vance, she said into the comm, proud that her voice only shook a little, initiating decoy run-in. 30 seconds, try not to let me die out. There, we will do our best, Vex replied. But no promises. That is the spirit. She gunned the engine and roared out of the compound, the 2 other vehicles falling in behind her. The Krallon response was immediate. Plasma fire erupted from a dozen positions, tracking the convoy as it raced down the ruined street. Contact left, one of the other drivers shouted. Multiple hostiles. Mira yanked the steering mechanism hard, the vehicle sliding sideways as a plasma bolt scorched the air where she had been a second before. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. Keep moving, she yelled. They're taking the bait, and they were. Carveth watched the tactical displays as Kron units diverted from their assault positions, pursuing the convoys. It was working against all logic, against all reason. It was actually working. The main Krallon force hit the compound 15 minutes later, but their numbers were reduced by nearly 40%. The defenders held barely, but they held. Mira skidded back into the compound 3 hours later, her vehicle looking like it had been through a trash compactor. She was bleeding from a cut on her forehead. Her armor was cracked in 2 places, and she was grinning like a maniac. Did it work? She asked, stumbling out of the vehicle. It worked, Vex confirmed. Casualties were half of what we projected. You just saved a lot of lives, Lieutenant. Great, wonderful. I would like to vomit now. She made it exactly 4 steps before doing precisely that. Carveth sat back in his chair, staring at the screens in disbelief. 2 days. She had survived. 2 days, and not just survived, she had actively contributed to the defense. She had adapted, innovated, and succeeded in ways that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about humans. He pulled up her service record again, looking at that boring list of administrative achievements, and realized everyone had made the same mistake. They had seen a human and assumed soft, assumed weak, assumed unprepared. They had forgotten that humanity had not reached the stars by filing reports. They had clawed their way up from a violent, hostile planet where everything wanted to kill them. They had survived ice ages and predators and their own worst impulses. That survival instinct did not just disappear because they had spent a few generations in climate-controlled offices. Mirace was proving that in the most dramatic way possible. The third day dawned with artillery fire, lots of artillery fire. The Krallon had apparently decided that subtlety was overrated and were simply trying to level the entire district. This is bad, Coral said, which Carveth had learned was Dendery, for we are all probably going to die. How bad? Mira asked, pulling on her battered helmet. Remember when I said yesterday was going to be worse? I was wrong. Today is going to be worse. The assault came in waves. Hundreds of Krallon warriors supported by armor and air units, the defenders, fought with everything they had, but it was not enough. Slowly, inevitably, they were pushed back. Mira found herself in the center of the maelstrom, coordinating fire teams and calling out target priorities. Something had shifted in her over the past 3 days. The terrified clerk was still there, buried deep, but on the surface was something harder, something that had learned to fight because the alternative was unacceptable. East wall is collapsing, someone screamed over the comm. Fall back to secondary positions, Vex ordered. Fighting withdrawal people, make them pay for every meter. Mira covered the retreat, her rifle overheating from constant fire. A Krallon warrior charged her position and she shot it. Another came and she shot that one too. Then 3 more, then 5. Her rifle died. Energy pack depleted. She dropped it, pulled her sidearm, kept firing. The sidearm clicked empty. She grabbed a chunk of rubble and threw it at the next Krallon. It bounced off its armor, but it was enough to distract it for the half-second Coral needed to line up a shot. Thanks, the old Dendari yelled. Do not mention it. Then she heard it, a sound that made her heart soar, the distinctive whine of atmospheric engines. She looked up and saw 3 transport ships dropping through the clouds, their weapons blazing as they scattered the Krallon advance. The extraction team had arrived early. All units prepare for emergency evacuation. A voice boomed over the general channel. We are pulling everyone out. Move, move, move. The defenders needed no further encouragement. They ran for the landing zone, fighting a desperate rear guard action as the transport settled into position. Mira was the last one to board, turning at the ramp to fire one final burst at the pursuing Krallon. Then hands grabbed her, pulling her inside, and the transport was lifting off, leaving the ruined city below. She collapsed on the deck, gasping for air, her entire body shaking with exhaustion. An adrenaline crash. Lieutenant Vance, an officer, approached, looking concerned. Are you all right? Define all right, she managed. Fair enough. The officer helped her sit up. I have orders to bring you directly to the Galactic Defense Command. Apparently, there are some people who want to have a very serious conversation about how you ended up down there. Please tell me. Someone is getting fired. For this, multiple someones, I am told. Mira laughed, a sound that was slightly unhinged but entirely genuine. Good. That is really, really good. The medical bay of the orbital station smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. Mira sat on an examination table while a Vidian medic, her tentacles moving with practice deficiency, scanned her injuries. The cuts and bruises were superficial, but the medic kept making concerned clicking noises with her beak. Your stress hormone levels are catastrophic, the medic said, her translator rendering the words in a flat, mechanical tone. You should be catatonic. I will pencil that in for later, Mira replied, wincing as the medic applied something cold to the gash on her forehead. Right now I am running on spite and whatever was in that gray nutritional paste. That explains the elevated toxin readings. The medic sealed the wound with a dermal regenerator. You are cleared for duty, though I strongly recommend psychological evaluation. Add it to the list. 20 minutes later, Mira found herself standing outside the office of Admiral Thoros, the Galactic Defense Command's regional coordinator. She still wore her battered combat armor. Her hair was a disaster, and she was pretty sure she smelled like a chemical fire, not exactly parade ground material. The door slid open before she could knock. Lieutenant Vance, get in here, a growly voice commanded. Admiral Thoros was a cranner, which meant he looked like someone had crossbred a rhinoceros with a tank and given it anger management issues. His office was sparse, decorated only with tactical maps and what Mira assumed were either commendations or very aggressive threats. With Crow culture, it was hard to tell, sir, Mira said, snapping to attention. Despite her exhaustion, sit down before you fall down, Lieutenant. Thoros gestured to a chair that had clearly been designed for someone with a different skeletal structure. We have got a situation. Another one, because I am pretty much at capacity for situations right now. The Admiral's tusks twitched in what might have been amusement. Fair assessment, let me be direct. Your deployment to Sector 12 was a catastrophic administrative failure. Heads are already rolling. The logistics officer responsible has been reassigned to counting supply crates on the edge of the galaxy for the rest of his natural life. Good. However, Thoros continued, pulling up a holographic display. Your performance during those 72 hours has created a different kind of problem. Every commander in the sector is now requesting human personnel for combat operations. They think you are some kind of secret weapon we have been holding back. Mira stared at him. That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. I am a clerk who got lucky and did not die. Sergeant Vex's report disagrees. He cited your tactical innovations, rapid adaptation to combat conditions, and what he called, and I quote, terrifying competence under pressure. Thoros leaned back in his chair, which groaned under his weight. The convoy deception alone saved an estimated 200 lives. I just applied basic logistics theory. Anyone could have done it, but they did not. You did. The Admiral studied her with eyes that had seen decades of war. Here is the situation. Lieutenant Command wants to know if this was a fluke or if humans actually have combat potential we have been overlooking. So what? I am some kind of experiment. Now you are a data point, an extremely interesting data point. Thoros pulled up another screen showing casualty statistics. Human administrative personnel have a 99.7% survival rate in their assignments. No. Why? Because we work in offices. Exactly. We put you in safe positions because we assumed you could not handle anything else, but you just spent 3 days in a meat grinder and not only survived, but excelled. That challenges some very fundamental assumptions about species capabilities. Mira felt a headache building behind her eyes. Admiral, with all due respect, I do not want to be the poster child for humans in combat. I want to go back to filing reports and never seeing another plasma rifle for the rest of my life. Unfortunately, that is not an option. Excuse me, Thoros. Tapped the desk and a new image appeared. It showed Mira covered in dust and blood standing on the transport ramp, firing at pursuing Krallon forces. Someone had captured the moment. Perfectly, she looked fierce. Determined, heroic, she looked like a soldier. This image has been all over the galactic news feeds for the past 6 hours. Thoros said the headline is lost. Clerk becomes war hero. You are famous. Lieutenant, whether you want to be or not. Mira wanted to scream. Instead, she took a deep breath and asked, what happens now? Now you get a choice. You can accept a transfer to proper combat training, become an actual soldier, and help us figure out if other humans can do what you did, or you can take a medical discharge, go home and spend the rest of your life answering questions about those 3 days. Some choice. Best I can offer. The Admiral's expression softened slightly. For what it is worth, I think you have real talent for this. Raw talent, unrefined, but talent nonetheless. Given proper training, you could be exceptional. I just want to be alive. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. Mira looked at the image of herself. Again, that woman firing from the transport ramp seemed like a stranger. Someone wearing her face but filled with something Mira had not known she possessed: courage, skill, purpose. She thought about Sergeant Vex, about Coral, about all the soldiers who had accepted her without question and fought beside her like she belonged. She thought about the Krallon warriors she had killed and the lives she had saved by improvising solutions to impossible problems. Maybe she was not just a clerk anymore. Maybe she had never been just a clerk. If I do this, she said slowly, I want assurances, real training, not just throwing me at problems and hoping I survive. And I want a say in how other humans are recruited and deployed. No more wrong button presses that get people killed. Thoros' tusks curved upward in a genuine smile. Deal. Welcome to the real military, Lieutenant. 3 months later, Karveth found himself once again staring at screens. But this time he was watching something considerably less terrifying. Mira Vance stood in a training facility, instructing a class of 20 human recruits on tactical combat maneuvers. She moved with confidence now, her commands crisp and clear, her demonstrations efficient. The recruits hung on her every word. The key is not to think like soldiers from species that evolved for war, she was saying. We did not. We evolved to survive by being clever, adaptable, and stubborn as hell. Use that when you are facing something bigger and stronger. You outthink it when you are outgunned. You improvise when everything says you should quit. You keep going anyway, because that is what humans do. One of the recruits raised a hand. Lieutenant, is it true you killed 17 Krallon warriors in 3 days with no combat training? 19 actually, but who is counting? Mira grinned. And I had plenty of motivation. Motivation is half the battle. The other half is not doing anything catastrophically stupid. Try to remember that ratio. Karveth had been monitoring the human combat training program since its inception. The results were frankly shocking. Humans were not physically superior to most species. They were not naturally aggressive like Kraragnar or strategically gifted like Talvarians. But they had something else, an ability to adapt that bordered on supernatural. They learned fast, improvised constantly, and refused to accept defeat, even when logic said they should. First human combat unit had deployed. Last week, they performed above expectations in every category. The galaxy was going to have to recalibrate its assumptions. Humans were not just administrators. They were whatever they needed to be. Still think this was a mistake, Gree asked, appearing in Carv's doorway. I think it was the best mistake we ever made, Carveth admitted. Though I would not want to be the one who explains to the Krallon that their biggest headache started because someone hit the wrong button. Speaking of which, Lieutenant Vance is receiving a commendation tomorrow. Valor in combat, innovative tactical thinking, and exemplary service. You are invited to the ceremony. Carveth pulled up Mira's file one more time, looking at that same boring photograph from months ago. Exemplary performance in administrative duties. Combination for reorganizing supply databases. Nothing that hinted at what she would become. I will be there, he said. Ceremony took place in the main hall of the Galactic Defense Station, packed with officers from 24 species. Mira stood at attention while Admiral Tharos pinned the Medal of Distinguished Service to her uniform. She looked uncomfortable with the attention, but she held her composure. Lieutenant Vance, Tharos said, his voice carrying across the hall, your actions on the surface of Epsilon 7 demonstrated courage, innovation, and dedication to duty under the most extreme circumstances. You have set a new standard for human service personnel and opened doors we did not know existed. The galaxy is safer because you refused to quit when quitting would have been reasonable. Thank you. The hall erupted in applause. Mira saluted, her face carefully neutral, but Carveth could see the emotion in her eyes. After the ceremony, Carveth approached her in the reception area. She was surrounded by well-wishers, but she spotted him and excused herself. Lieutenant Carveth, she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. I understand you were watching my telemetry during those 3 days. I was, he clasped her hand awkwardly, still not entirely comfortable with the custom. I thought I was going to watch you die. Instead, I watched you rewrite the book on human capabilities. It was terrifying and inspiring in equal measure. I was just trying not to get killed. That is what everyone says, but there is trying not to die, and then there is what you did. Carveth tilted his head, studying her. Do you regret it, being thrown into combat? Mira was quiet for a long moment. I regret that people died. I regret that the war is still happening, but regret the experience itself. No, I learned things about myself I never would have discovered filing reports. I found out I am capable of more than I thought possible. That has value, even if it came at a terrible price. Especially then. She looked around the reception hall at the mix of species celebrating and networking. The galaxy spent centuries putting humans in boxes labeled safe and boring. Someone had to break out eventually. I'm just glad I survived the experience. So what is next for you? More training, more teaching. Command wants me to help develop doctrine for human combat units. Turns out a lot of what I did instinctively can be systematized and taught. She smiled, and it was the first genuinely relaxed expression Carveth had seen from her. Also, I have been promoted. Captain Vance has a nice ring to it. Congratulations, Captain. Thank you, and Carth, thanks for watching over Me, I read the report you filed. You advocated for immediate extraction. 3 separate times. That meant something. I did not think you had a chance. Neither did I. She glanced at the medal on her chest. Funny how things work out. 6 months after that, the 1st All-Human Combat Battalion deployed to active duty. They were called the Wrong Button Battalion, a name they adopted with pride and dark humor. Their insignia showed a finger hovering over a button with the motto, "Best mistakes make heroes." Mira served as their executive officer, applying everything she had learned to keep them alive and effective. The battalion earned a reputation for unconventional tactics and refusing to accept impossible as an answer. They were not the strongest or the fastest, but they were clever and relentless, and that combination won battles. The Krallon learned to hate them specifically. 2 years after the Wrong Button press, that changed everything. The war ended. The Crayon sued for peace after a human-led operation captured 3 of their major supply depots using tactics so bizarre that the enemy command structure assumed they were facing a much larger force. They were not. They were facing 30 humans who had learned from Murants that rules were suggestions and impossible was just a difficulty setting. Carveth attended the peace signing as part of the Galactic Defense Delegation. He watched as representatives from dozens of species celebrated the end of a war that had cost millions of lives, and he watched as Captain Mira Vance, the woman who had accidentally started a revolution, stood quietly in the corner looking uncomfortable with all the attention. "Strange, is it not?" Grease said, joining him at the observation window. "All of this because someone hit the wrong button." "Not just that," Carveth replied. "All of this because one person refused to give up when everyone expected her to fail. The button was just the beginning." "True, though. I wonder what would have happened if we had sent someone else. Would they have adapted like she did? We will never know, but I suspect more humans are capable than we realized. Vance just proved it first." Down on the ceremony floor, a reporter approached Mira, asking for a quote about how it felt to be the human who changed galactic military doctrine. "Honestly," Mira said, and Carveth could hear the wry amusement in her voice. "Even from this distance, I still think about filing reports. Sometimes they were a lot less likely to shoot at me, but I suppose this is fine too. At least now when someone asks what I do, the answer is more interesting than organizing supply databases. Do you have any advice for other humans considering military service?" Mira thought for a moment. "Yeah, learn where the safety is on your rifle before you need it, and remember that surviving is just the first step, figuring out how to live with what you had to do to survive. That is the real challenge." The reporter scribbled notes frantically. "And what about the medal? What does it mean to you?" "It means I got lucky and had good people watching my back. It means someone made a mistake that could have killed me but instead taught me who I really am, and it means that sometimes the wrong path leads to the right destination, even if the journey nearly kills you." She excused herself and walked out to the observation deck, standing alone for a moment and staring at the stars. Carveth watched her, this human who had accidentally become a hero, and realized that the galaxy had learned an important lesson: never underestimate someone just because they filed reports. You never know what they are capable of. until you give them a reason to find out. Mira pulled out a small data pad and began typing. Old habits died hard. Apparently, Carve zoomed in the surveillance feed out of curiosity and saw she was writing a report. Of course, she was. Some things never changed. The title read, After Action Analysis. Human Combat Performance. Recommendations for Future Deployment. Even as a war hero, she was still organizing information and optimizing systems. She had just expanded her scope from supply chains to military doctrine. Carve laughed, a sound his species rarely made. The galaxy had accidentally created the perfect soldier by sending a logistics expert to war, someone who understood systems, adapted to chaos, and refused to quit even when every odd was against them. And it all started because someone pressed the wrong button somewhere in the administrative offices of Galactic Defense Command. That button still existed. Carve had checked. They had installed 7 redundant safety protocols around it and posted warnings in 15 languages. But he suspected that someday, somehow, someone would press it again, and when they did, another unsuspecting human would be thrown into chaos. And based on what he had seen from Miras and the Wrong Button Battalion, that human would probably do just fine. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humans were not just clerks and administrators. They were survivors who happened to be really good at filing reports, and when you gave survivors a reason to fight, they became something extraordinary. Mira finished her report, saved it, and looked up at the stars one more time. Then she smiled, turned around, and walked back into the ceremony. She had work to do, doctrines to write, soldiers to train, a reputation to maintain, and somewhere in a quiet office on a distant station there was probably a supply database that desperately needed reorganizing. But that could wait. She had a speech to give, hands to shake, and a future to build. The galaxy had accidentally discovered what humans could do when pushed beyond their comfort zones. Now, it was her job to make sure that discovery meant something, to ensure that no more humans got thrown into war zones by accident, and that those who chose to serve were prepared for what they would face. It was a big job, an important job, the kind of job that would have terrified the version of herself who had climbed into that transport 3 years ago expecting a quiet assignment to the Archives Division. But that version of her was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to fight, to lead, and to survive against impossible odds. Captain Mira Vance, war hero, tactical innovator, and still at heart someone who really appreciated a well-organized filing system. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again, and it all started with one wrong button.